Hello and welcome to Wilson Center Now, a production of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. I'm John Molesky. Our guests today are Ambassador Akbar Ahmed and Professor Alexander Thurston. Let me tell you a little bit about both gentlemen. Ambassador Ahmed is the Ibn Khaldun Chair of Islamic Studies at American University. Previously, Akbar served as Pakistan's High Commissioner to Ireland and the UK. And the BBC at the time called him the world's leading authority on contemporary Islam. Also, Mr. Thurston is an assistant professor at the University of Cincinnati, where he specializes in the study of Islam and politics. He's also an author and the creator of the Sahel blog, I should say. Alex was also a fellow with the Wilson Center's Africa program back in 2017 and 2018 when he was teaching just down the road at Georgetown University. Both gentlemen join us today to discuss Islam's response to COVID-19. Welcome to both of you. Ramadan Mubarak, Akbar.
Ramadan Mubarak. John, thank you for inviting us.
Thanks so much
to have both of you. Thanks. You know, let me begin by, we've seen the Easter holiday for Christians with dramatic scenes of a completely empty Vatican grounds where usually mobs are there. And now we're moving into we are in the holy month of Ramadan. Are we seeing similar empty places of worship within the Islamic faith?
John, that's a fascinating question. And as an anthropologist, I've been trying to make some sense of it. So on one level, those countries which have a highly centralized government backed by the military like Egypt do see empty mosques because there's an order and people simply respond, or the Secret Service comes a knocking. On the other hand, those countries like Pakistan, which is a democracy and yet is being constantly challenged by mobs and the people in the street and so on, you see a kind of halfway house. So the government wants a lockdown and the people sometimes just challenge that order. So you see mosques that are full, people are still coming to the mosque, still embracing. They're trying to come to some kind of an order responding to this decision to keep 5 feet or 6 feet away. But that breaks down very quickly in a mosque. The structure of the mosque and the prayers are such. So contradictory. On the other hand, I'm also seeing some very strange patterns. For example, the Muslim world, take Pakistan again, you have something like 550 deaths. Now compare this to the United States with 75 now. Compare this to the UK with over 30,000. And you ask yourself, my God, these are the very advanced civilizations with all the resources. And here's Pakistan really struggling. And I thought Pakistan would be hit very, very hard. Of course, there's some tendency to exaggerate figures, maybe hide figures. But still, this baffles me. Why this very limited number of deaths? One could be because of the youthful populations. A very, very large section of the population is young, below a certain age. That could be the explanation. And also a more philosophic response. John, that's something that fascinates me. People in the Muslim world actually responding on a much deeper level than I'm seeing people here in the West, where very often the response is purely in terms of when will the economy open, when will the jobs come back, because that is a major concern of millions and millions of people right now, people dying and people being unemployed. And the question, where will we get the food? Where will we put food on our tables, or how will we feed our families? Now, the same problem in the Muslim world I'm seeing, again, is more philosophic. It is part of nature. God is in command. God will decide when this will happen. So there's a kind of psychological cushion. There's less of a panic. There's more resignation, which I find fascinating and it needs to be explored. And maybe Professor Alex could explore some of these ideas.
Alex, one of the things Akbar mentioned was strong governments responding. You study Africa quite intently, and in many cases, there are examples of just the opposite of that, weak states. What is the picture that you can paint for us?
Yeah, I mean, especially in Islamic West Africa, there are some dynamics, I think, that parallel, what the ambassador was talking about with Pakistan. I mean, countries where mosques have remained open or where governments have tried to close mosques, like in Niger and in Burkina Faso, and then ended up, basically backing down in the face of popular pressure. So there's definitely a mixed picture across Muslim West Africa too.
Is there a central? I mean, the Pope attempted to speak to Christians during the Easter celebration and encourage social distancing and all compliance with all of the health authorities. Of course, that's not a singular voice for all of Christianity. not even sure it's a singular voice for all of Catholicism. Where are the pockets of authority within the Muslim world that can speak with the kind of authority that might get people to comply, even if they don't live within that particular country?
Yeah,
it really varies from country to country. I mean, so, Saudi Arabia has the Committee of Senior Scholars, which is a clerical body very closely aligned to the government, with tremendous authority, at least on an official level, within the society. In the United States, you have prominent scholars with mass followings on Twitter or Facebook, who have been very much aligned with public health measures and have been very cautious. A lot of times in countries you have some kind of official clerical body. The sort of issue, I guess, is the level of trust and confidence that ordinary citizens and worshipers have in those bodies. Sometimes state-aligned clerics are seen as just sort of the puppets of the ruler, or not having very much credibility. So it can really vary kind of popular acceptance of what these clerical bodies say.
Akbar, Imran Khan has received some criticism in Pakistan for being too agreeable to the terms that religious leaders have asked for.
Yes, he faces that because I think by instinct he would like to move one way, but he's also very aware of the street power of these religious leaders. But in terms of your question, John, regarding the Pope, there is no Pope figure, as it were, in Islam, but there is also a distinct pattern. That is, in the Sunni world, which is about 80 to 90% of the Muslim world, there is an authority in Al-Azhar in Cairo. By and large, a lot of people respect that authority and take a cue from that, including the imams in Makkah and Medina. This is very significant. So you'll have a kind of voice coming out, and a lot of the Muslim world then picks this up. In the Shia world, Iran is the focus, and in Iran you have the centers of power in Qom, which is the holy city in Iran. So there's again a clear-cut idea that this is where the religious authority lies, and their instructions are for what we will follow in times of crisis.
Alex, the authorities in Saudi Arabia, Akbar mentioned Saudi Arabia, they are discouraging Hajj pilgrimage. Is the expectation that worshippers will comply?
Yeah, I mean, the Saudi government, has the ability to grant, Hajj visas for people coming for the pilgrimage. And so they can shut down Hajj if they want to. And I think it's pretty likely that they will. I mean, which would be, unprecedented in most people's living memory, but which would not be unprecedented in the broader arc of Islamic history. There have definitely been times in the past when, cholera outbreaks or other sort of diseases prompted, suspensions of the pilgrimage during particular years. So if they move in that direction, and again, I think they will, they'll have historical precedents and textual authority to cite as they make that decision.
Akbar, are there traditions within the Muslim faith that are, or ceremonies or things that are particular to it that make it more difficult to comply with the various types of social distancing and other measures or other restrictions that are being suggested?
John, I find that Islam, and as a Muslim and watching and observing the practices of Islam and the rituals, that Islam tends to be very practical. So the matters of death and matters of situation like we are facing now, Islam will always take a very practical position. And that's why when you talk about social distancing or staying safe or washing your hands, a lot of Muslims will say, well, in any case, we wash our hands. We don't embrace people. When we greet each other, we put our hand on our hearts and without shaking hands. So in that sense, there is again a cushion and acceptability to this terrible attack by the virus. At the same time, people are asking, where will all this end? Because the scale of the attack is unprecedented, as Alex has pointed out. It's not happened in our recent memory that the Hajj is being postponed. That's a huge, huge psychological blow and something that concerns every Muslim. So where will this end? What will emerge after it ends? Who are going to be our leaders? Who's going to be ruling the Muslim world? How will we relate to other countries? And what will be the leadership in those countries? These are questions that a lot of people are asking in the Muslim world. And I think these are very relevant questions.
We've been focusing on religion so far in many ways, but there's certainly an overlap between politics and religion in this case, and science and medicine. There have been a lot of discussions out there. I saw one yesterday from another think tank that was talking about whether authoritarian states or democratic governments have had a leg up in how they're dealing with this, and is one outpacing the other. I would ask both of you to give us your thoughts on how Muslim majority countries, or particularly those who have Islamic rulership, what has their response been like? How does it measure up?
Again, John, a very interesting question and an important question. When I look at the United States, people are very concerned. We are discussing this non-stop 24/7 on television, and the media and the president is involved, his cabinet is involved. And yet we see the responses. We are, as it were, moving from split second to split second, just moving along in terms of crisis. And not many people seem to be aware of when this thing is going to end, how it will end, why it actually started. The Secretary of State will say it's Wuhan. The Chinese are involved. The Chinese say the Americans are involved. We really are in an era of uncertainty, apart from being in a very, very different and a very challenging time. In the Muslim world, we have a similar situation. And there, the leaders like Imran Khan, you mentioned him, are trying to rally people around exactly on the basis of tradition and custom and give comfort along these lines. Now, I'm worried that when the pandemic hits those countries, and it will, you suddenly will have governments and official structures quite unprepared for the scale of the attack. Here, at least, we're all very concerned, and we are running around trying to get ventilators or PPEs and so on. But I just wonder how Pakistan or Egypt will be able to provide those facilities. And when that happens, when the scale of the attack increases, how will they cope with it? So these are huge questions that are coming. I think this will be the coming storm, and we need to be very much prepared for it. And we can learn a lot from each other, where we can learn in terms of the philosophy of the situation around us. How do we respond to it as human beings, as individuals? Is it something that we should begin to learn to appreciate each other, reach out to each other without prejudice, without color, race, or religion on our minds? Remember that some people responded by pulling out a noose and a swastika and marching up to the head office in a state. The people have shot people in markets, in Whole Food markets, simply because someone said you didn't speak properly to my wife. So there's that sense of immediate violence also. This is a very dangerous time, and we really need the leadership of all these countries, our country and in the Muslim world, to be aware of the dangers which we are facing now, and to take every step very carefully, sensibly, and with a lot of wisdom.
Alex, your thoughts on the response from Muslim majority countries or Islamic ruled countries?
I mean, to me, one of the main factors seems to be not whether a country is democratic or authoritarian, but just how proactive they are. So Senegal, overwhelmingly Muslim majority country in West Africa, very proactive, relatively democratic country, right? But really sort of jumped on trying to do testing and tracing and so forth, and have been one of the leading countries in trying to develop very rapid and cheap tests. As I mentioned too, some of the countries in the Gulf, which are highly authoritarian, right, have had they've had high case counts, but they've also been, I think, very proactive in locking down their countries. So yeah, to me, it seems that the speed and the depth of the response is the key factor a lot of the time.
Alex, I think you've written about this, but another discussion that's out there that I know both of you have thought about is this notion that somehow COVID-19 could be beneficial to jihadists. Alex, could you share your thoughts on that analysis? And then Akbar will ask you to do so as well.
Yeah, I mean, my main thought is that it's too soon to tell. There's been, I think, sort of a media narrative that the virus will automatically benefit Al-Qaeda and ISIS, but I don't see why that would be the case. I mean, or why that has to be the case. I mean, first of all, the virus could affect, jihadist ranks, could sicken jihadist leaders, some of whom are actually quite elderly. There's this image of jihadists as entirely, youthful, but, Ayman al-Zawahiri, the leader of Al-Qaeda, was born in 1951, if memory serves. Some leaders actually may be quite vulnerable. And then in areas where jihadists have tried to govern, they can sometimes, chase out local officials. They can sometimes oversee the extraction of resources, but they've very, very seldom mounted a massive public health response to a major challenge. And they may fail at that, and already a lot of people, when jihadists try to take control, they vote with their feet and they leave. And we may see even more of that amid the pandemic.
John, I think that most people in the Muslim world are aware of the enormity of what's happening, and also the overlap with religion, that this is something happening, maybe expressing God's displeasure or whatever. So there is an element of divinity in what is happening, and therefore a rebuke to humanity. And I think the last thing people should be doing is, in this environment, to pick up a gun or a knife or a sword and try to cause harm or cause violence or create violence. I think it is absolutely criminal and madness. In any case, when these ISIS and these groups create bloodshed and create havoc, it's something to be condemned. But in this environment, I do not think Muslims are going to respond positively at all. So if people are looking for an opportunity, they're not going to find it, because people are concentrating on living day to day and trying to cope with the enormity of this crisis taking place around them. You have this Russian roulette kind of people dying. You don't know who's going to die, who's going to be affected. You have presidents, leaders of nations, movie stars, anyone at random being affected, just like fate almost picking up someone at random. And I don't think in the midst of all this, the men of violence are going to find much resonance.
Sure, go ahead, Alex.
I just want to second that. I mean, I think, first of all, it's a tiny minority of Muslims who were attracted to jihadism in the first place. And then I think, I just want to second this idea that Al-Qaeda and ISIS are not necessarily going to be able to speak to the kind of spiritual pain and the kind of spiritual questioning that a lot of people have right now.
Thank you. Thank you for that thought. Akbar, you have spent the majority of your adult life trying to be a bridge among worlds and have been central in this interfaith dialogue. Does COVID-19 change the equation moving forward? There's been a lot of discussion, and I'm going to ask Alex the same question in the politics of the world. Is this a transactional moment in history where technical lockdowns or other procedures will be enacted, and then when it ends, we'll just go back to where we were? Or is this something that's potentially transformational, where there will be seismic changes, governments rising, falling, ends of movements, beginnings of movements? Akbar, what are your thoughts?
Great question, John, great question. I hope we learn from this moment. I hope we are able to understand that humanity is one, that when this virus attacks, it attacks everyone, whatever your color, your religion. And I hope it teaches us this lesson, that we must tackle it together as one humanity, number one. Number two, I fear that as we are human, we don't learn lessons, we repeat the same mistake again and again, that we'll go back to normal very quickly. When things settle down, we may once again go back to our old habits, our bad habits. But here, the hope that I see, the light, is really the religious leaders, the spiritual leaders. I do see a lot of them very thoughtful, and they're reacting in a very positive way. I'm this evening, after a show here, in a dialogue with the Muslim Jewish Council of Washington, D.C. We're having an iftar. So again, we're seeing a lot of religious, spiritual leaders concerned about the moment and the capacity and the ability to take advantage of this moment and answer exactly your question, that how do we allow this moment to become consolidated and not just evaporated, so that we all go back to the earlier positions.
Alex.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's, definitely some reasons to be hopeful. I mean, just here in the United States, I mean, some of the Muslim religious leaders who I respect the most, Imam Omar Suleiman in Texas, Yasser Qadi, other figures like that have been at the forefront of trying to, respond to people's spiritual concerns, to try to offer messages of hope and so forth. I mean, on the more pessimistic side, I think that the pandemic is already revealing and exacerbating inequalities around the world. I think that it could, in some cases, entrench authoritarianism. I mean, turning back to the Muslim majority world, I mean, some of the, protest movements in countries like Algeria and elsewhere are now at a real crossroads, trying to decide, do they keep pushing to try to demand systemic change in their countries, or do they acknowledge that it's really difficult to sustain a physical protest movement amid, lockdowns and contagion of the virus? So, I mean, I think there are very hopeful scenarios for the world, and then there are some where we emerge into, just a more deeply unequal and authoritarian environment.
And John, whatever happens, and I hope I'm wrong here, but it seems that democracy itself now is in the spotlight, in the dock, because people are questioning the very value of democracy. I believe there was a census here at the United States, an article in The Guardian recently said this, in which the majority of people, polled about 60%, actually said that for a situation like this, you need a strong centralized hand to deal with this. In the Muslim world, there's already a sentiment that democracy is something coming from the West. It hasn't really worked. It's not equitable. It isn't solving our problems of poverty, of distribution of wealth, and so on. So you are going to see, I think, as a sociologist, a major challenge to the concept of democracy and a major challenge to law and order in the Muslim world. Where all this will end up again is going to be something very, very interesting for us to watch, and watch with great interest and great scrutiny, because I think things will change very dramatically. It'll be very difficult to go back to the old world. I mean, remember, here we are in the United States, the most powerful country in the history of mankind, possibly, and greatest army in the history of mankind. And we are just helpless. We can't locate and eliminate and destroy a tiny virus which we can't see. So these paradoxes are being picked up by the world, and the world is then saying, why should we then go back to the old situation when we were at the receiving end, when we were at the receiving end of economic, political, and social divisions?
Thank you, Akbar. Alex, any final thoughts?
No, I mean, you know, we've covered a lot of ground here. I mean, yeah, I guess maybe one final thought is just, you know, the images that we've seen from this time are just extraordinary. You know, the images of you know, the Kaaba in Mecca and the sanctuary in Mecca, you know, virtually empty. I mean, you know, again, things that are unprecedented in living memory. You know, the call to prayer being replaced by, you know, the phrase, you know, come to prayer, come to salvation, being replaced with, you know, pray in your homes and so forth. I mean, this is, you know, this is a huge change, and yeah, how all this plays out in people's religious lives, you know, in whatever the new normal is yeah, it's a big deal.
John, could I make a
Yes,
small
please.
comment here? Yeah, you see, as you know, in Islam, God's two greatest names are the compassionate, the merciful. And I think we all, Muslim or not Muslim, are aware that these are values, these are virtues which really are at the center of all the great faiths, the notion of compassion and mercy, which allows us to reach out to others. And I think we have to hang on to this, that in the midst of all this uncertainty, all the potential violence in the situation and the potential change, very dramatic change, leading to all kinds of dramatic violence, you do have at the heart of humanity the idea of compassion and mercy. And that is what we have to hold on to, propagate, spread, so that we do not lose what I think are the most essential features of ourselves as human beings.
Well, that's a profound final thought, and we're going to leave it there. And gentlemen, thank you for sharing your deep insights and deep knowledge of the subject matter today. We're the lucky ones, right? We can continue to do our work, even though it is remotely during this pandemic. And let's hope that we all get to it as well as possible on the other side. And maybe the three of us can come together in the same room at some point and discuss the fallout further.
Thank you, John. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I want to thank our viewers as well. Hope you enjoyed this edition of Wilson Center Now, and that you'll join us again soon. Until then, for all of us at the center, I'm John Molesky. Thanks for being here.